like you said, like SCTV was there, and Second City's always been around, but it was really kind of like the '80s when like stand-up comedy, both for Yuck Yucks and Canada, kind of got its footing.
Yeah, because Yale started branching out and people started going to the club. You started really building a following of people who just really love stand-up. And what was happening was that, Howie Mandel came on the scene, Jim Carrey came on the scene.
Yeah, do you
Um,
remember any of their like early performances? Or I
oh
always
yeah,
love those origin stories of like seeing someone on their very first time.
yeah. I mean, the first time I saw Jim on stage, it was he just went, yeah, this guy's, there's just something there as far as not only his ability to do voices, but he's just a rubbery guy and his ability to make faces. You see Howie Mandel and how it would just be so outrageous because what you're doing, you're coming off the time of Steve Martin, and as that sort of character was so, that would morph into what Howie was doing.
Yes, that is the voice of Canadian comedian Evan Carter, and you've tuned into another episode of Comedy History 101, where we school you in comedy. I am Harmon, and today Evan is our guest as we do a deep dive into the history of Yuk Yuk's Comedy Club. Now, if you live here south of the border, as they say in Canada, and are not familiar with Yuk Yuk's Comedy Club, it was founded in 1976 in Toronto by comedy impresario Mark Breslin and is considered the cornerstone of Canadian stand-up comedy. And Yuk Yuk's is known for helping launch the careers of Howie Mandel, Jim Carrey, Norm Macdonald, Russell Peters, Harlan Williams, Rick Moranis, I'm kind of reading this, Elvira Kurt, Mike McDonald, oh my God, bunch of other names. And our guest Evan Carter was there from the very beginning, and he is going to be our tour guide into the history of Yuk Yuk's Comedy Club. As we do, once again, I like using the phrase deep dive into the history of Yuk Yuk's. But before we jump into the episode, hey friends, remember, show a little love for Comedy History 101. Throw us a few stars on iTunes. Give us a comment, a like. Check out our website, comedyhistory101.com, and we will actually read your comments right here on the podcast. And before we jump into the episode, a few quick plugs. On Friday, June 28th, 7 p.m. at the Red Room in the Lower East Side, I'll be presenting my show Tale, NYC's finest storytelling. And also on July 7th, 8:30 at the People's Improv Theater, I'll be presenting my award-winning show AI versus Human Roast Battle. Come out and see a human comedian / rapper take on a machine learning AI in a roast battle of tomorrow. And you can find out all about my tour dates at harmonleon.com or on the social medias at harmonleon. And now, without further ado, let's learn the history of Yuk Yuk's Comedy Club.
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone! Excuse me!
Comedy History 101.
Just to dive right in, and let's go micro. What is your personal history with Yuk Yuk's? What was the first time that you walked into a Yuk Yuk's Comedy Club?
The first time was April of 1977. It was at the 519 Church Street in Toronto, around Church and Wellesley. I think it's now, it would be called where the village is. Toronto's gay village is now there. And I think there's a community center there. Anyhow, in the basement, they had a room that Yuk Yuk's rented out on Wednesday nights. So it was just one night a week. And yeah, for me, it was April of 77.
And what do you remember about that particular gig? Was that your first time doing stand-up, or was there other venues around Toronto?
Well, for me, there were no other like official venues. And for me, the first time I'd done stand-up in these little shows, whether it was in high school, and I think I did one show in college, and I didn't know about any other places to do stand-up. So I don't know if I heard about it in the paper or a friend told me about it or what it was, but then I saw that on Wednesday night, so I went down, and I'm not sure if I saw a show or I phoned in and talked about getting on, and they were, obviously at that time, there were only a few stand-ups who were doing it. Before that, I think of Jerry Bednoff, who's in Los Angeles, and you would know him from the movie 40-Year-Old Virgin. Ted Wallachin, who was a radio guy. You had Larry Horowitz, you had Brian Nazimok, Steve Schuster. I'm trying to think of who else would have been around there. Glenn Griffith doing impressions. I'm not sure if Marlo Lacoste had started then there at that time. But
And was at the time, was Mark Breslin, was he like hosting it, or was he just kind of facilitating it? And what did you know of him in your first encounter?
Didn't know anything about him. He had, I think he was hosting a lot of those shows because there was nobody really to do it. And then different comics, as things opened up, would do it as the years went by. We had some great hosts. Brian Nazimok was always a lot of fun to host. And then the year after I started, Simon Rakoff started up, and Simon's a fantastic host and a wonderful stand-up in his own right. So you did have different comics who would host, but at the beginning, if memory serves me correct, it was primarily Mark.
It was like an optimistic scene with it, because this was like the budding of, would you say like Yuk Yuk's is Canadian comedy in a way, or there wouldn't be Canadian comedy scene without the origin of Yuk Yuk's? What was that early days like?
I think there would have been, as far as the stand-up scene, because in Canada there was scenes from like the early 20th century of troops or duos. I think of Wayne and Schuster being, one of the early ones and one of the most famous ones. But Canada has more history in the troop sense. I mean, and once again, you get into Second City and doing that. So, but as far as stand-up, now that was primarily, you can get the odd guy doing it. Gary David was doing it. Harry Russell was doing it. Rummy Bishop was doing it. But these guys were primarily, there was no club. There was no club to do it. So, they were doing stand-up, and it would be in Legions, it would be in Peeler bars, it would be, those kind of like banquet rooms and things like that, but nothing, comedy club per se. So I think when Mark came along, I'm trying to think of who else would have been across the country. You might have had Ernie Butler came in Montreal. You had Rich Elwood out in Vancouver, but in the Toronto scene, it was for just stand-up comedy. It would have been Yuks. And I mean, there were a few other rooms that were, I would say, more cabaret rooms.
Right.
And you would have Martin Short. I remember going in and watching Martin Short, working on characters and things like that in this one room. But for just week after week of stand-up, it would have been Yuk Yuk's.
What was the logistics like on that first room? Was it actually a good room to perform, or is it still kind of evolving?
Think of performing in like a 1 or 2 lane bowling alley. The stage was at one end of the bowling alley, and then the audience was in, I think might have been 2 and 2 on each side with a line, and you would get to the stage. You would come up quite often through the that middle row.
I'm trying to use the phone!
So that was just like once a week, you would get like 5 minutes or whatever for open mic. When did it kind of make the next leap in its Yuk Yuk evolution?
I think that might have been around 80 when it jumped to Yorkville, at the corner of Bay and Yorkville, downstairs there. I think it was 80. It may have been 81. I'm not sure of the exact dates, but yeah. So it went from 519 Church Street to Yorkville.
And does that the location it stayed at for a while, the Yorkville location? Or?
It was there for a while, and then they had, I think they had the Uptown Club, and then you had Yonge and Eglinton, where Absolute Comedy is now. That was Yuk Yuk's, and I think it stayed empty for a while. Then Jason Lawrence took it over with Absolute Comedy, and that's been going on now for about 15 years. But, at the time, it was a 7-day-a-week or a 6-day-a-week club. It was
so it made the jump from open just once a week open mic to suddenly going 7 days a week.
I don't know. It was Monday night. They may have tried it, but I don't know. I can't remember exactly if that was what they went to. But it certainly was branching out so that it was running more than one night a week, and they were going to 5-6 nights a week.
And what was in general the comedy scene? Like early 80s, you got like Kids in the Hall coming up. I forgot the name. The Rivoli Club, I think.
At the Rivoli on Queen Street and around Queen and Spadina, they had the Rivoli was going, and once again you were getting into places that would do it once in a while. You had the Riverboat in Yorkville. That was an old folk rock club, which was famous in the late 60s. And then in its waning days, and you'd have shows with maybe folk musicians and stand-up comics. So you would have that going on there. So it started to branch out a bit. And, at that time, late 70s, early 80s, they, different entrepreneurs started seeing the value in it and would do one-offs every once in a while, once a month around what is now the GTA. So things started branching out, and you would start also doing clubs. Guys sort of took on the role as producers. And, I was fortunate to come under the tutelage of guys like Ted Wallachin and Gary David. And they said, no, you can't be in a comedy club all the time. And they started booking more bars. I would get gigs introducing peelers. You would be in...
What's a peeler? Is that a stripper?
Strip, yes. Yeah,
I just never heard that term. That's kind of funny.
Okay, yeah, strip bar. So you would get that going on and Legion. So somebody would book something at a town, and you'd show up with the sound system, you'd show up with the whole bit and do one-off show. And then they started doing cross-Canada tours under the name of Yuk Yuk's, and so the rest of the country started doing it. And as I said, you had guys like Ernie Butler in Montreal and Rich Elwood out in Vancouver, and they started branching out as well. So the comedy scene really started to open up. And of course, at that time, you didn't have, so many different places to watch stand-up comedy, say online, or even at late night television. There was The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. That was it. So it wasn't until Comedy Central came on the scene that people started saying, oh, I can watch this at home, which did not help the club scene at all, because, people didn't understand. And I'm sure that you've learned that, wow, the difference between watching comedy online and watching comedy at a club, it's two completely different things. So once things started and people started getting used to it, because once again, they weren't used to stand-up. They were used to Kids in the Hall. They were used to SCTV. And at that time, that television show was just breaking wide open. So Canadian comedy was really starting to step to the forefront.
So like when Yuk Yuk started like in the, or came about in the 80s into like the 7-night-a-week club, do you think that's really, like you said, like SCTV was there, and Second City's always been around, but it was really kind of like the 80s when like stand-up comedy, both for Yuk Yuk's and Canada, kind of got its footing?
Yeah, because Yelp started branching out, and people started going to the club and really building, you started really building a following of people who just really love stand-up. And what was happening was that, Howie Mandel came on the scene, Jim Carrey came on the scene,
Yeah, do you remember any of their like early performances? Or I always
yeah.
love those origin stories of like seeing someone on their very first time and
Oh
just
yeah,
kind
it
of
was.
knowing. Yeah, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I saw Jim on stage, it was he just went, yeah, this guy's, there's just something there as far as not only his ability to do voices, but he's just a rubbery guy and his ability to make faces. You'd see Howie Mandel and how it would just be so outrageous because what you're doing, you're coming off the time of Steve Martin, and as that sort of character was so, that would morph into what Howie was doing and sort of the tail end of that. And then, comics from south of the border would start coming up, Jay Leno would come in. I saw David Letterman. Wasn't playing at Yuk Yuk's, but he was playing a separate venue. Fred Stoller, who went on to, I think he did about a year or two of produce Seinfeld. And Fred's extremely funny. And even Timothy Leary and what he was on his stand-up tour. I mean, it wasn't good,
Yeah,
but the fact that you got to see, Timothy
icon.
Leary come in and do something, and like watching these guys, Sam Kinison coming and watching these guys come in, and it just started building up the name not only of Yuk Yuk's but also stand-up comedy in Canada, because you would go across to the work south of the border, and either comics you were working with or audiences who were sort of clued into the scene would have known the name. And then like on the West Coast, once that movie industry opened up, and maybe I'm getting a little off topic, but when the West Coast movie industry worked up, when Rich Elwood had punchlines, you would have so many guys like Robin Williams, he was shooting a movie in Vancouver. He'd be at punchlines. Rick Overton, who you would know. Oh, Rick?
He's been on the podcast.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, when he was up there.
He's a great guy.
He's a great guy. And I remember, Rick and I he'd be shooting something and I'd be in town working something, and we'd get together afterwards and just hang out. And we did fundraisers together out in Vancouver. So you had guys coming up and clicking into the Canadian comedy scene. But as far as Yuk Yuk's was concerned, you had people coming into Toronto who would be doing it, and even acts who were doing other venues. I remember being on stage and the side door of the club would opened up and Rodney Dangerfield walked in. You had that kind of thing going on because the entertainers, no matter what stripe they might be, as far as comics or musicians or improv people, once they finish their gig, they're going to go look and play a little bit more. Yeah, and hang out at the club. So Dangerfield came in, and then after I came off, he went on, and you're watching Rodney Dangerfield.
You stupid. Everybody so stupid.
What would be like some of the most memorable performances there, both good and bad?
Oh, bad Timothy Leary.
Okay.
It was.
But he,
it was
again, he's not a stand-up, and it's
he's not a stand-up.
Just in personal, I hate when like celebrities suddenly go, "I'm going to do stand-up comedy, do a stand-up comedy tour," and they have the laurels of being famous without any chops. But
and you saw that a lot for Just for Laughs, and I think that may have helped in his demise because they would bring a lot of like sitcom stars or something like that, and then they would get up and they're not stand-ups, but as far as those stand-ups are concerned, wow. It's like, once again, I'm going to go back to Jim Carrey. We just watched him tear up the room.
Yeah, and he was wasn't he like 15 when he started, or just really, really young?
It was pretty young.
Like maybe high school age? Maybe like high school age, maybe, or just probably just out of high school?
He was pretty young, and we just said, this guy's something, something very special. And once again, you'd see guys who were just really funny guys who would come into town. Once again, Fred Stoller, who would come into town, very funny. And then I had a chance to work with Fred on a number of occasions in New York, watching Sam Kinison work a small room. It just ripped the place apart, just absolutely ripped the room apart. And Leto, even though he's lower key, but just a funny guy. So, being able to see that and quite frankly work with them, because it just wasn't them when they came into town. There would be a show put together, and you would be part of the show. But yeah, just some of those nights were special. But yeah, working with Jim, not only at Yuk Yuk's, but in other venues, you just saw something very, very special.
And just in general, what were the audiences? Did they help shape the comedy there? Generally good, or did it take a while for them to also get their legs and be educated in comedy, like starting in the early 80s, to be like a general Yuk Yuk's crowd?
Well, Howard, it's funny because what I saw then and what I even see now is that you had individuals who were really into stand-up comedy and saw it on television, and then when they learned of a club, came in and they just loved stand-up comedy. And that's probably how so many stand-up comics got going, because it was just an art form that we took to. And then you had the other people who were curious, and
The
they
curious.
may have been, pardon?
The curious. Always look out for the curious.
Always look out for the curious.
They're going to come in
because,
a bachelorette party or something like that.
that,
The
or you
curious.
see, say, local celebrities who would come in because it became the hot club in town, but they weren't really stand-up fans, and then would find out that, oh my God, stand-up's a pretty aggressive art form.
Uh-huh.
And, if you're a big shot and you can be seen from the stage, when somebody on stage is going to go into attack mode just because, and those people generally didn't come back. And just because it wasn't for them, they would go to Second City more often, because Second City is,
Yeah, you got
it's
that
nice.
distance from the audience.
Yeah, there's a distance, and it's nice, and they're going to make you laugh, but it's because they're doing a sketch on, the post office. Stand-ups may do something on the post office, but there's going to be a almost a Tyrannosaurus Rex type of approach to things, and that turns some people off, and I understand that, and you even see it today. I remember hearing a story about Jim Carrey playing a casino, and a lot of the people went to the casino thinking they were going to see the guy
Price is Right guy.
from Price is Right guy.
Yeah, the same like Bob Saget had that when he was the Full House guy.
Yeah, that's another guy who
Yeah.
was extremely funny. When the number of times I saw or Word with Bob or Gilbert Godfrey, just really funny guys. But if you go to see the guy from television, you're going to be shocked and appalled. And that's what happened with Drew Carey. They went to see the guy from The Price is Right. And, I'm sure they had to carry a few of them out on stretchers because he did his act.
Yeah, he did his adult nightclub act,
Yeah.
which is like because that's what comedy's stand-up's about, is just that freeing aspect of like,
Yeah.
you're the director, performer, writer. And,
Yeah, so-
you're not doing what the producers of Price is Right tells you.
Yeah. He's doing his act. And even watching Marsha Warfield when I worked with her in Toronto, and they thought they were getting the bailiff from Night Court. Marsha was just a wonderful person, just did her act, and they're going, hey, how come how come you're not talking about Bull? No, I'm gonna do my act.
And then when did Yuk Yuk's go to be like the franchise? When did it move like all over Canada?
I can't remember those dates, quite frankly, Harmon. I'm not sure when it started to spread out. I'm going to guess the mid-'80s, but, I can't put my finger on the exact timeline. I'm sure others in there, if you spoke to Brian Nasmok or Simon Rakoff, they would have a better idea on that timeline.
So something I read was it wasn't necessarily Mark Breslin franchising his club, it was like independent comedy clubs could take on the brand much in the same way, they could be like a Tim Hortons. So
Yeah.
in a sense, it was like, you get a Yuk Yuk's franchise, but you're the independent promoter, producer of that. And
I think so. I think
and
that's
again,
how
it's
it-
like, from their perspective, it's probably, they're thinking, this might help because it's a known brand to get people in.
Yeah, I think that's the way it works. And then once again, yeah, I mean, I'm sure that you talked to other individuals that were closer to the decision making process. And I don't know if you're going to talk to Mark, but Mark would certainly be able to fill you in with all that information.
Yeah. So, just a few last questions because I just saw
Sure.
my Zoom is wrapping up in 10 minutes. But
Okay.
that keeps conversations concise and on point. So, do you think was it a good thing or a bad thing or a monopoly that it franchised and maybe you weren't in the Yuk Yuk system? It was hard to get work, or just in general operate
Well,
like a monopoly, or
At times, it was hard to get work, but at the same time, and I can only speak for myself, I got such an education because I was working places that were not necessarily comedy clubs. So you learn to work like across the board. And the independent clubs that were run across the country were, for the most part, like really well run. It was great. Like Punchlines in Vancouver, they had a couple of clubs up there. Great clubs to play. The Comedy Nest when Ernie Butler ran it in Montreal. It was just a fantastic club to play. And even now, when you're working clubs across the country that are not Yuk Yuk's, they're all well-run clubs. Rumors in the Winnipeg, I haven't played there in a long time, but when I did play there, it was just a really good place to play. But then, once again, under the tutelage of guys like Gary David and Harry Russell, Remy Bishop, Frenchie McFarlane, I got out on the road and played places that were not necessarily comedy clubs. And you're in a Legion, 4 hours from Toronto, you're gonna get an education. And I'm glad that I was introduced to that with those guys because it really helped me learn how to work rooms and how to go into different venues.
And what's your most memorable moment on stage at Yuk Yuk's?
Let's see. One of my most memorable moments on stage, you know what? And
It could be for better or worse.
I think for better, it was just one of those nights when the planets just lined up, where you just had one of those nights that I can't remember. I think it was a Friday night, and I just had a set that just sort of an out of body experience type of set with the audience. And the set might have been about 10, 15 minutes. And I've had more of them in other venues now. But as Yuk Yuk's per se, yeah, I think it would have been that night. And I think also the first night that I headlined at 519 Church Street, and I did the set, and Ted Wallace came up, put me in a headlock. Now I'm 6'4", Ted's about 6'7", and Ted put me in a headlock and he said, "Competition," and then released the headlock, and we were laughing. And that's when I felt that, okay, I'm part of the gang now. I've passed my initiation, and yeah, it was good.
And lastly, what do you think Yuk Yuk's place is in comedy history?
Oh, I think it's there as one of the cornerstones in stand-up in Canada. Certainly as far as where I came in and being fortunate enough to be in Toronto where it started. It's a real, like I say, cornerstone in Canadian stand-up history, and made the jump into, what you see today as far as Just for Laughs and, the comedy scene right across the country. And there's so many funny people out there that just have a place to go. And Yuk Yuk's is one of those places to go. And it opened it up. So now that we've got absolute comedy, you've got the Comedy Bar, you've got, like I say, clubs right across the country, Yuk Yuk's and independent clubs. And people could say, yeah, I've got a place to go, or else we'd just be out there wandering in the wilderness. And, and doing that. So yeah, it helped build the foundation of what you see today.
And who do you think would be on the Yuk Yuk's Mount Rushmore, even though I know that's in North Dakota, but like the 4 iconic comedians that have come from Yuk Yuk's? I mean, I know you mentioned Jim Carrey and Howie Mandel. Who do you think would also
other
fill that
Canadians?
out?
Other Canadians? Well,
Yeah,
you've
yeah,
got
yeah.
Norm Macdonald, certainly. And let's see, who would also be on the Mount Rushmore that came out of Toronto? Yeah, I'm trying to think of, because there's so many sort of once you get past Norm Macdonald.
Did you see his early sets? Norm?
Yes. Yeah.
And was he just like fully formed comedian right out of the box?
Well, for me, I'd be watching him going, okay, what's going on here? And then you start watching it, and you would see this clay, and then it would be formed into this wonderful stand-up, and you'd start watching it, and you'd see the faces of the audience, and they weren't quite sure.
Like he's like, he's almost like jazz, where it's like the spaces in between are the funny bits.
Yeah.
The journey to the punchline that
That's
could
right.
take 10 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. But for me personally, Jim, Norm, and yeah, I'm trying to think of stand-up wise who would really.
Well, I know Russell Peters sells out Madison Square Garden, so
yeah, Russell. Russell has done extremely well for himself, and was, very smart in hooking into a demographic that wasn't served, and he's got that sewn up, and he's done very well as far as like just guys to watch on stage that you just go, wow. For me, I'm sticking with Jim and Norm Macdonald. And then there's a whole lot of us that are around in there. And then you got everybody else. So
Evan, I just see this is going to stop at a minute 30, but I want to get a chance. Where can people find you?
okay, evancarter.com. Also, my album, You Speak So Well. You can listen to that on all the streaming services and on SiriusXM. Also, at the end of July, I'll be at the Crack Up Comedy Festival, and that takes place in Ottawa, Kingston, and Cornwall, and Pembroke. And I'll be headlining at the Absolute Comedy Club in Toronto in the middle of July.
Evan, thank you so much. And I really appreciate talking to you and hearing those stories.
Thanks, Harmon. Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you. Take care.
Yeah, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And that wraps up our history of Yuk Yuk's Comedy Club. And I'd like to thank our guest, Evan Carter, along with my friend Jean-Francois, who put me in touch with Evan Carter. Thank you. And once again, let's get through this quickly. Take some time to like, subscribe, and comment on Comedy History 101. Wherever you get your podcasts, every little star, good comment, like, helps us on the journey of Comedy History 101. Also, we will read your comments here on the podcast if you comment on our website, comedyhistory101.com, or on the social medias at Comedy History 101. That's right, we will read your comments, such as this from Gabriel Ortega, who writes on the history of Here Comes the Judge, comedy's first meme episode. Gabriel writes, great reading your blog post. Thank you very much, Gabriel. Comedy History 101 applauds you and salutes you. We applaud you and we salute you. And once again, a quick few plugs. On Friday, June 28th, 7 p.m. at the Red Room in the Lower East Side, I'll be presenting my show, Tale, NYC's finest storytelling. No hokey gimmicks, no dumb themes. Tale brings you the best in New York storytelling. Also on Sunday, July 7th, 8:30 at the People's Improv Theater in New York City, I'll be presenting my show, AI versus Human Roast Battle. Come out and see a human comedian take on a machine learning AI in a roast battle of tomorrow. And you can find out all about these dates on my site, harmonleon.com, or on the social medias at harmonleon. And until next time, bye-bye.
You're stupid. Everybody so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone!
Comedy History 101.